Dear attendees, now we move on towards our next keynote speaker. Our next keynote speaker is from Pakistan, Professor Dr. Zafar Iqbal. He is Dean and Professor of Media Studies in Faculty of Social Sciences, International Islamic University, Islamabad, Pakistan. Dr. Zafar Iqbal carries over 26 years of teaching and research experience, and he received doctorate in mass communication specializing in media and government relations in 2003. Today, Dr. Zafar Iqbal gave his speech about new Islamophobia, defining Islamophobia as a social order. Please.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, and thank you very much, Dr. Sahaba. At the very outset, I would like to pay thanks to Dr. Shahzadi, to Bahauddin Zakariya University, Multan, for organizing such a scholarly event of a second international conference in continuation. And I would also like to pay my great gratitude to Dr. 𝐃𝐢𝐬𝐜𝐿, Dr. Yasmin, all my friends here. This has always been a pleasure to come to a place from where I started my career actually. This was the first place where I landed after having done my master's from Government University. And again, this is something very interesting to let you know about it, that Bahauddin Zakariya University is also my alma mater, because I have done my PhD from this university as well. Continuing on the discussion that I made in the first international conference on mass communication and mass media, that probably took place sometime in June or July last year, where I have been describing what Islamophobia is all about. And I tried to give its background and its construction, especially the mediated construction of Islamophobia. But today I am going to talk about something ahead of Islamophobia, because we have tried to redefine the concept of Islamophobia in a different perspective, giving it an absolutely, what you call is a new conundrum, or a new way of thinking on the term or the construct of Islamophobia, that we call as not the new Islamophobia, but neo-Islamophobia, N-E-O, neo-Islamophobia. I will be trying to unpack this concept for you today. The debate on Islamophobia began with the release of Runnymede report in 1997, which termed is after identifying what a new reality, anti-Muslim prejudice, which has been in West for centuries, has recently grown more explicit, extreme, and dangerous in every section of Western media, as well as all sections of Western society. This report declared Islamophobia to be a challenge for us all, and a second similar report issued by the Runnymede Trust 20 years later in 2017 confirmed that it is still a challenge for us all. And it has now manifested as anti-Muslim racism that has become more complex and entrenched in the Western societies, unfortunately. These reports demonstrated the changing nature of Islamophobia, which has spawned a significant body of literature, yet it is still debatable as what exactly this term is all about. Contemporary literature presents a variety of perspectives on the construct. Practically all the perspectives have one thing in common, that is, that Islamophobia is essentially a hostile attitude towards Muslims and Islam. Many scholars have accepted Orientalism to understand the attitude. For instance, Eric Bleach claimed that Islamophobia is a new word for an old concept of Orientalism, while Khalid Bedoun considers it as a modern progeny of Orientalism, and Edward Said viewed Orientalism as a Eurocentric hostility towards Arabo-Islamic population. But now Orientalism is something more than just prejudice against a particular segment of Muslim population, as it has come to target everyone who appears to be a Muslim. Consider, for instance, Sikh, whose appearance is nearly identical to that of Muslims, and who have been target of Islamophobic attacks in the West quite often since the tragic incident of 9/11. If one accepts that Islamophobia is just Orientalism with a new name, one could contend that new Islamophobia has surpassed the old one, since it now has manifested as a reaction to the problematization of Muslim identity. The new Islamophobia, I'm not talking about yet the new Islamophobia. The new Islamophobia is viewed as a contrived fear or prejudice fomented by the existing Eurocentric and Orientalist global power structure, directed at an imagined or real Muslim threat. It was termed Neo-Orientalism and defined as the neo-conservative construction of Islam and Muslims as a world social order. An existential threat, of course, to what the conservatives and the right-wing actors call the Western world and civilization. It manifests itself in the media as race and gendered stereotypes, as well as demonized cultural images of Muslims and Islam, with the concomitant perception of Western cultural superiority. A scholar, 𝐃𝐲𝐬𝐜𝐿 Khan, claims that Western scholars such as Samuel Huntington, Bernard Lewis and others, as well as journalists, advocated Neo-Orientalism to serve the political and ideological functions of defending US imperialism and Western hegemony over the world. Our work suggests it represents a new style of governance in the West adopted by some politicians, such as Donald Trump, who used Islamophobia as a political strategy, thereby shaping the existing socio-political order into Islamophobic one, in which hatred for Islam and everything related to it appear to be collective behavior of the US society as a whole. We renamed the new phenomenon as a new Islamophobia. I have also produced 3 papers meanwhile in the last year, which talks about Islamophobia and further unpacks it by giving an example that how the Western media have constructed Islamophobia, and that has now appeared to be a social order in the Western societies, a socio-political and even the cultural order. And on the basis of that order, you see, they have developed a lot of structural mechanisms to contain and control the activities of Muslims and the spread of Islam in the Western society. So if somebody is interested, they can just type the neo-Islamophobic concept with my name. They will find some of the articles on internet. Theoretically, the term Islamophobia in the relevant literature refers to the form of prejudice or racism that is directed at Islam and Muslims. While prejudice and racism practically appears to oppose to opposite sides of the same kind, since prejudice refers to an attitudinal bias and racism is, of course, a behavioral bias. And two together constitute the basis for the racism, of course. It appeared that racism is the most manifested type of prejudice and was defined as a form of racial discrimination that stems from conscious and unconscious personal attitudes on prejudice, made up of likings and disliking. Gordon Allport, the one very renowned scholar who has talked about prejudice in his very famous international book, Nature of Prejudice, he talks about it that prejudice is feeling favorable and unfavorable toward a person or thing prior to or not based on the actual experiences. While furthering on prejudice, he defined racial ethnic prejudice as an antipathy based upon a faulty and inflexible generalization. Its expressions can be directed towards a group as a whole or an individual of the prejudiced group. Considering on this, Islamophobia may also refer to hostile attitudes towards the Muslim based on dislike or hatred of Islam and all of that it represents. Although the construct neo-Islamophobia refers to a similar attitude based on the image of Islam and Muslims as enemies, threatening Westerns' well-being and even the survival of the West. They, in fact, are considered to be as a threat to the world peace. However, its prevalence may not be found essentially as an attitudinal manifestation of some of the individuals, but as a consequence to the social and political order that most of the time the political elite of a society develop. On the other hand, the enemy image can not only be based on dislike or hate, because it always carries the risk of violence and destruction, and as a result is a matter of survival and existence. These facts distinguish neo-Islamophobia from the traditional concept of Islamophobia, as both terms represent different reasons for the same hostile attitude towards, of course, Muslims and Islam. Considering the phenomena of Islamophobia in which people experience hatred or dislike for Muslims as a result of their identity as other in the Western societies or the other group. When this otherness turns into enmity, important point, when this otherness turns into enmity, Islamophobia gives way to new phenomenon in which hatred or dislike of Islam and everything that is associated with them becomes the new normal. This phenomena was termed as Islamophobia, neo-Islamophobia. Now, let me give you some perception, the idea of the perception that is there in the West about Muslim Islam. For instance, the current perceptions of Muslims in the West who are regarded as others, and in some countries such as the United States as the enemies in some of the media discourses, and of course, as Trump said, we have to figure it out that who is the enemy, because Islam is the one that hates us. The process of othering is most typically initiated by the encounter between civilizations with no prior history of interaction or understanding, but can also occur between groups that have lived in constant contact and communication. Bernard Lewis in 1994, while studying the history of Islam in Europe, identified that Europeans and Muslims were constantly in contact and communication with each other, such as others, sometimes as enemies, and with hostile attitudes towards each other formed and confirmed by the centuries of experience, and for the Europeans, the fear of Islam. This points to the fact that the hate of Islam took birth with the rebirth of this religion, and that the first enemy image of Muslims also originated during the early formative phase of Islam, when they were viewed as representative of a new religion and considered a threat to the continuity of other religious and political domains. Church elder, this is again very interesting, and I have been putting all my scholarship on Islamophobia on these lines, that the church elders initiated a polemical discourse targeting Prophet ﷺ and the tenets of Islam. Saint John of Damascus weaponized polemical words and images to frame Islam as a bundle of Christian heresies. Similarly, other scholars' account of John's anti-Islam polemics revealed that those were the earliest Christian reflections on this new phenomenon that was considered as Islamophobia. John of Damascus polemics inspired other church elders of the time who targeted Islam polemically to prove it a fake religion or heresy, or you can say concoction of a human being, which is in fact drawn upon from the New Testament and the Old Testaments. That is why Daniel Norman called these early medieval polemicists as the architect of the anti-Muslim prejudice in the West. This prejudice was expressed through negative othering discourse directed at Muslims. For instance, Saint Eulogius, a 9th century priest from Spain, otherized Muslims by stating that our servants are now ruling us, and they put our religion and culture at risk. That's why I normally call it as an existential threat for some of the political and social and religious cultures of the West. It was his intense fear of Islam that drove him to dehumanize Muslims by saying, like them, I mean the Muslims, they use the term Saracens, and the sons of Sarah, Hazrat Sarah alayhi salatu wasalam. Saracens, and that was in fact given a word to the Muslims over there at that time, are savages. Saracens are savages. They are beasts, not like men, not men like us. When Seljuk Turkish soldiers overthrew the Christian Byzantine Empire in 1071. Byzantine Empire asked for the military assistance from Pope Urban II. Again, he is one of the very prominent Pope scholar who produced huge literature against Islam and constructed the negative image of Islam and Muslim in the Western world. He faced a military and political threat from the Turks, who had already occupied the sparsely populated areas of Anatolia. The Pope responded with a call for Christian crusades, you can call them the holy wars against Muslim despots, framing them as enemies of God and pledging to restore lost Jerusalem. To justify violence against Muslims in the name of holy wars, The church elders authored well-crafted propaganda based on negative othering discourse that was intended to defame Muslims as implacable enemies and followers of a religion determined to usurp and extinguish and completely extinct Christianity with no hope of any reconciliation. In addition, another very important person, that was Peter the Venerable of Cluny in 13th century, 12th century and 13th century, who was one of the most influential and learned priests of 12th century, whose verbal martial art and moral support for the Crusaders' military campaign proved to be a way towards a destiny where Christianity triumphs over Islam. If somebody is interested to know more about him and the kind of efforts he in fact leveled against Islam and Muslims, my research paper on Peter the Venerable, his polemics against Prophet ﷺ, that is there and easily accessible on internet. That will help you go deeper into the kind of efforts he made to defame and put Islam into some kind of problematic area. However, the crusade failed to stop Turkish forces from establishing Ottoman Empire by the end of 12th century. This again shocked the Orthodox Christianity hierarchy, who convened, again very important point, who convened General Council of Church in vain. This is not the vein of Vienna probably, this is vein from France. Between 1311 and 1312 AD to devise a strategy dealing with Muslim enemies. Luminaries and the most important elders of Christianity in the council denounced the Crusades and called for the study of Saracens language, which was of course Arabic and Turkish at that time, and to interact with them intellectually, if not religiously. For example, Raymond Lull advocated the intellectual study of Islamic culture alongside the notion that Christian faith could be shown to non-believers rationally. The council therefore declared Islam as a theological heresy at the level of morals and practice, and decided to establish Oriental language chairs at universities throughout Europe, including Arabic, Greek, Hebrew, Syriac at Paris, Oxford, Avignon, Salamonia. These all were the places where they established chairs to study Arabic and the Arab triumphs against the Western world. Orientalism began as a means of dealing with the military, political and socio-cultural challenges posed by the Ottoman Empire's expansion into Europe. However, Turks' integration into Europe was short-lived because they lost military and political control over European priorities following the second unsuccessful siege of Vienna in the late 17th century. Following Ottomans' decline, the enemy image of Muslims became dormant, but the image of Muslim other remained functional, manifested itself on different levels in European society. The Islam's enemy image reactivated in 1979 following the Iranian Revolution in contemporary literature, which was interpreted as a return to extremely orthodoxy in Islam, and Islam was labeled as anti-Western in nature. Pioneering study of the coverage of Muslims before and after the Iranian hostage crisis 1979 and 1981 by Edward Said revealed that the US media increasingly portrayed Muslim as a threatening other as part of the Western outlook known as Orientalism, which sees Christianity as good and Islam as an evil. Rather, they have also used another term that there are two kinds of religion in the world. One are the false religion, other are the true religions, and in the false religions only Islam was there, when in the other terms, the true religions, Judaism and Christianity and even the Hinduism was considered to be as the true religions. Unfortunately, this kind of literature is there and which is very famous as well at the same time. Similarly, this long-standing binary was modernized by the Huntington's class of civilization thesis, with the warning that Islam has bloody borders, which reoriented Islam and its adherents as an existential threat to the West. It became the subject of debate among policymakers, academia and the media. Since then, ominous warnings have fueled fears of a clash of civilization, with Islam portrayed as a triple threat: political, civilizational and demographic. Fear of Islamic threats began global and viral with the emergence of Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda the 9/11 terror attacks in the United States in 2001, and the subsequent 7/7 bombings in London in 2005, as well as strikes in Madrid, Bali, and other parts of Europe and many Muslim countries. These events led to the global war on terror and gave way to reorienting the whole of Islam, the enemy race, reviving plans for a new world order. This implies that Muslims are not West natural born enemies, but they become enemy as a result of the local circumstances that were there. In his recent book, 𝐂𝐫𝐤𝐿 turned the war and terror to be modern extension of the old crusades against Muslim enemies, 9th century, 10th century, and 12th century. The impact of this old crusade that targeted Muslims population across the world beyond what had previously been, since it was fueled by the American media campaign launched in the aftermath of 9/11, which he declared that his new American crusade would be the world's fight. A fight that has turned its guns on Islam and its adherents anywhere and everywhere. Since then, Western politicians have portrayed Islam as a destructive force and Muslims as the main drivers of terror and insecurity in the world. The media relentlessly propagated their anti-Islam narratives, resulting in hate reactions for Muslims across the world. Todd Green says presuming all Muslims as somehow responsible for terrorism leads to society where discriminating against and targeting Muslims is acceptable. This is true of the US society, which has been saturated with hatred for Islam and everything it stands for, particularly after 9/11. Consider Federal Bureau of Investigation reports, which reported that 1,600% increase in hate crimes against Muslims, including verbal abuses and physical attacks on individuals and places of worship in the United States between 2000 and 2001. This percentage, however, declined in the years that followed, but it did rise again in response to the politicization of Islam by the Western politicians and its publications by the media. One very important fact that I would like to narrate here out of this text is that when in 2016, I would like to have the attention of James Kelly as well on this subject, if he could. In 2016, when Trump took oath and he started vomiting, you see, some kind of feminist statements against Islam and Muslims, you know what was the result of it? In next 3 months' time, there have been more than 20 mosques that have been burned down in the United States only. I'm not talking about the whole part of Europe and the whole North America. I'm talking about in the United States only more than 16. And they were all arson attacks, unfortunately. So because you see the racist tendencies are there, and once their political leader and the one they admire and they have recently elected as president of their country, once he says something against the people, those who live in their country, and they call them as the one those who are cause of many tensions in the United States and threat to the peace, then of course that would ignite or that would provoke people and make them do something that is against the Muslims and Islam, and that would be considered as justified at the same time. Rather, it now has become a political tool for mobilizing national hatred for Islam. As I was saying, that Donald Trump, who rose to power with a demonstrably Islamophobic campaign, during his campaign, for example, he told CNN that I think Islam hates us and that it is difficult to separate radical Islam from the Islam itself. When a state's president uses such hateful words for a religion, his words translate into collective hate behavior by the society as a whole, since he represents the state and of course not an individual. Similar behavior was witnessed in the US society during the first 3 months of Trump's presidency. I have just given an example out of it. This new condition in which the things were there to the US points to the psychological character of Islamophobia. For this character, the media plays a critical role in that it often stew up the elite hate narratives and therefore fomented hatred against Muslim Islam on a collective level, from cognitive to the behavioral patterns of society as a whole. Take for a second elite builders. I mean, taking this example, if the elite of a society says something, an individual who doesn't have any say in his own personal capacity says something, how does it differ? I'm giving you an example. For example, Geet Wilder. 𝐃𝐢𝐬𝐜 from Netherlands, who is well known for his anti-Islamic views and routinely exhibits his hatred in media. I mean, all kinds of media, Twitter and all that. And he is the one who was going to organize burning of Quran campaign in the West. So he was an individual, and his hatred is very clear. But he has to fail to generate the same level of popular indignation as Trump did. The point of Constitution in that is that now speaking of an individual and does not have ultimate control over the state, but this could change if he gains his power. You know, he is, I'm talking about 𝐃𝐢𝐬𝐜, he is the opposition leader in his assembly. So we expect that one day he would also become president of Netherlands. And once this kind of person would come into power, and if they start saying something like this, so you can imagine the state of Muslims living in the Netherlands. This was observed in the case of Trump, who was anti-Islam even before ascending to office, but was unable to create an anti-Islam climate on such a large scale as he did as president. In our exploration of Islamophobia lately, we have examined into deeply rooted prejudice, Orientalist perspectives and perceptions, and the systemic racism that fueled hatred against Muslims and Islam. Building upon this understanding, we have introduced the new concept which is called as the neo-Islamophobia, which transcends individuals' bias to encompass a broader societal, political, and cultural framework. Neo-Islamophobia operates as a systemic force perpetuating the otherization of Muslims and Islam within our collective consciousness, thereby normalizing hostility and disdain towards them. This construct sheds light on the intricate web of power dynamics and societal structures that sustain and amplify anti-Muslim sentiments, urging, of course, all of us, all the scholars from the Muslim world, from the Western world, because Islamophobia is not only the problem for the Muslims. This phenomenon has actually made the Western societies as volcanic as well. So for their own safety and peace, there needs to be gigantic efforts on part of all the Muslims and the Western Muslims and the media and the senior voices from all the societies. They should join hands and they should collectively work to eliminate the menace of Islamophobia from the West and from the world. Thank you very much.